Kristen, and you're listening to Podcast Amplify, a podcast for women entrepreneurs who want to amplify their voice and brand through podcasting and grow a wildly successful business. I'm the executive producer and host of 2 shows and an entrepreneur, and I love helping women grow their visibility, mindset, and business to the next level. Each week, I share tips on how to launch and leverage your podcast, and I'm bringing on the very best business leaders to give you advice on how to build your business empire. Let's amplify your voice and business. Hi, I'm Kristen, your host, and welcome back to the show. So one of the biggest questions that I'm asked around podcasting is, how long does it take? I know as busy entrepreneurs that we are typically juggling a lot. So people really want to know, like, how long is this podcasting thing going to take me? And the answer to that varies because it all depends on how fast you are at coming up with the ideas, recording, and the editing process. So those are all variables that factor into how long is it going to take you to create and produce your podcast. And for some people who don't edit their podcast themselves, the answer to how much time will producing a podcast take is completely different. But what I've learned is that things will take as long as they take. So if you schedule an hour to do something, that's how long it's going to take. And it's really just a matter of getting your process down and knowing how quickly you work. But I am aware as an entrepreneur myself that time is precious and we don't always have a lot of it. So that's why I wanted to talk about some time-saving hacks around recording your podcast. So I'm going to be talking about 5 hacks that will reduce the amount of time that you spend recording and producing your podcast. So these are things that I've learned in my journey of podcasting over the last year and few months, because I am someone who naturally looks for efficiency. It's just the way that I work. So I have high standards. I'm always looking for how can I do the best possible job in the short amount of time. This is just the way my brain works. I'm always looking for, they're not necessarily shortcuts. They're more like just working efficiently. What is a process that I can implement into this project that will make things run more smoothly and cut out any unnecessary obstacles, time, so that we can get to the end goal as quickly as possible. So that's what I've been tweaking over the last year, starting with my first podcast, the Explore New podcast, which is a travel podcast, and then to launching this new podcast, which is all about podcasting and growing your business, that I launched in August. So let's dive into what I've learned and these hacks that I think will really help you when you start your podcast to just hit the ground running and to produce your podcasts in a really efficient way. Okay, so the first thing that I learned to save time, and it's kind of a big one, is to record shorter episodes. So my first podcast, as I mentioned, it's a travel podcast and it's an hour-long format. So it's 45 minutes to an hour long. And I love it. I love getting into people's travel stories and the details, but they do take longer to edit. And if you're doing your own editing, this is something that you really want to consider because it just takes time. So when I was conceptualizing my second podcast, Podcast Amplify, the one you're listening to now, I thought about how could I minimize my editing time, yet give really impactful content. And I started listening to other people's podcasts that were much shorter. And what I realized is that I could give the same great content in a shorter amount of time. So for example, I publish 2 episodes a week. One's a podcasting tip, which is meant to be 10 minutes or less. And the second episode is a podcast interview, which is meant to be around 20, 25 minutes. And so what I realized is I could really create short, impactful podcast episodes for my new audience. And this really makes sense because my audience is business owners, entrepreneurs who, like I talked about earlier, just really value your time. You want to get the information quickly. You want to make sure it's super helpful and powerful. And that's what I've been able to do by cutting down the length of my episodes. And I have to be honest, I absolutely love my longer format travel podcasts. I love having these in-depth conversations, and that really works for that audience. But you want to think about who you're speaking to and what it is that they're looking for, how they might be consuming their podcasts. And I found that this quick 20-minute interview style is a lot of fun. So we just get right into it and it moves quickly and all of a sudden you're done. And I've had several people tell me like, oh, that was really fun. And I think it's because we just like got into the meat of it. And then I know that when my audience is going to listen to that interview, that they're going to get a ton of value in a really short amount of time. So that's my recording hack number one to save time, is to think about recording shorter episodes. Okay, recording hack number two, don't overthink the editing. So I've talked about this before in one of my past podcasts. I think it was an interview with Kendall about copywriting, but we definitely both completely overthought the editing and it took us hours. I mean, I'm talking like 4 to 6 hours for one episode when we first started. I will fully admit that. And it's just part of the learning curve, but it's something that I want to share with you so that you don't go through that painful process of just like editing it to death and making sure it's quote unquote perfect. So you can have a really conversational, like casual vibe on your podcast, and people won't be thrown off by verbal tics or you maybe talking over each other within reason, because it'll just be this really relatable sounding conversation, like a chat with friends. And that's something that people really respond to. So number two, do not overthink the editing. It does not need to be so polished and perfect. In fact, it not being perfect is what's going to make it more relatable. Hey explorers, we'll get back to the show in just a moment, but I wanted to take just a few seconds to invite you to the free workshop that I created. It's called The 3 Secrets to Starting Your Successful Podcast. Now, it's all about helping you to start your dream podcast so that you can share your voice and expand your business. If you want to join, just go to exploreryou.com. It's totally free. All right, friend, back to the show. Okay, number 3, use your guest bio as an intro. So for my Explorer in You podcast, I would get my guest bio and then I would write an intro and then I would record it. And I love that format. I love listening to the podcaster sort of set me up for the episode. However, it's not totally necessary, and you can do it in a much faster way by simply reading the person's bio before you dive into your conversation. So you can have them on the Zoom call and modify it slightly, or just simply read it as it is. And so you don't have to spend extra time sort of crafting your own bio around them and recording it and then adding it to your show. You can just talk about them based on what they've written about themselves and then dive into the interview. Okay, number 4, create a form for people to fill out to be on your show. So this will help screen your potential guests, and it will collect all the information that you need in one place. And you won't have to go back and forth via email. That's something that I learned, that time that it takes you to email people, that's valuable time. And that can add up for each guest. So if you can cut that out, you'll be saving a lot of your precious time. So create a Google form, super easy, and ask them to submit their bio, a photo, links to their social, any additional background information, just anything they would want to link to. And if you want an example, you can go to my website and click on the form there and see what I have listed there, and then use that as inspiration to create your own form. Definitely make sure you're capturing the information that you need in one easy place. So this just saves you time when trying to collect that information for each guest. Okay, number 5. So when you upload your podcast episode to your podcast host, you're always going to include show notes. So my suggestion is that you create a template where you can put all the information that you will need for your show. So for example, you'll always need a summary of the show, bullet points, a link to the show, a quote, possibly links to your guest's website and social, and then links to any resources that you provide that you want to direct listeners to. So have that in a Word doc already. And so you can just plug those in as you're listening to the episode and writing the summary or pulling out key bullet points or even a quote. So this just helps that process go quickly. You can go down the list and then you could just copy and paste everything in that document and put it into the show notes section when you're uploading your episode, and then hit live and there it goes. Usually you want to have a website for your podcast, so then you can copy all of that information and put it directly into the website. So creating a template for your show notes is just a great way to keep yourself organized and be able to quickly copy and paste that information. And that will also save you time. Okay, I'm going to give you a bonus time-saving hack. So this is something that is super easy to do, and I have found it so helpful. So my number 6 bonus time-saving recording hack is smile when you record. So if you're recording an intro or you're recording an ad for your podcast or you're recording, like I am right now, a solo show, it literally changes the tone of your voice when you smile when you're talking. And I would even say smile when you're reading someone's bio, because the energy that comes out, you will hear it. And why is this a time-saving hack? Because you won't have to go back and re-record your intro, your outro, your ads. So just trust me on this. If you want to be happy with your recording the first time and not have to spend time re-recording, do this simple thing of smiling while you're recording and delivering your content. It sounds so simple, but trust me, it works. And you will be thanking me for it. Okay, so that's it. Those are my 5 recording hacks for saving time. I hope that this was valuable and that you can see yourself implementing 1 or 2 of these things to really save you time. These are honestly things that I've started to implement after a year of producing a podcast and starting a new one. I really thought about, in addition to conceptualizing the show and figuring out how I wanted the podcast to serve my audience, I also thought about the process and what was working and what wasn't, and what could help me be a more efficient podcaster. And these are just a few things that I've learned during my time executive producing and hosting a podcast. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you know of anyone if you have friends who are interested in podcasting or colleagues, please share this episode with them if you feel like they would get value from it. And also, if you loved this show, please don't forget to rate it and leave a review. It's the best way to help grow this community. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe so you don't miss a show. And rating and reviewing this podcast is the best way to help support us. Always remember, your voice and what you have to offer is needed in the world. Until next week, take care.